It's time for another episode of Plead Your Case right here on WCTV. I'm your host, Caleb Yauger, and today we have Logan Lepiscopo and Spencer Frattare to provide their opinions on the many topics of discussion for today's episode. We're talking about MVP races for Major League Baseball in the National and American Leagues Week 2 just concluded for the NFL regular season, and so we'll talk about highs, lows, teams, and players to keep an eye on. Also, with college football in full swing, we're also going to play a little game of overrated or underrated, so you don't want to miss out. So sit back, relax, you know what time it is. It's time to plead your case.
You're watching WCTV, where we aim to bring you the best local coverage of what you care about most. Everything from local businesses to hometown sports and the latest weather. We're keeping up to date with what you need to know about issues that affect our campus and our community. We're telling the stories that matter, celebrating our past, our future, and our potential. So tune in for all the latest buzz right here on WCTV Channel 14, Waynesburg.
It's time for our first segment here on Plead Your Case. We're going to talk about Major League Baseball. The regular season is about to wrap up, and we're going to be talking about American League and National League MVP candidates. But first, it's an important question to ask, and we're going to start with Logan Lepiscopo. Does it matter when it comes to success? Does it matter considering team success when it comes to considering MVP candidates? For Logan?
So I think obviously MVP award we all know is an individual award for a player's success in the league. But when you look at it from an MLB perspective, if you look at the last 20 MVPs, so 10 from the AL, 10 from the NL, 16 of those 20 have been on a playoff team, and 4 of those teams have gone on to appear in the World Series or even go on to win the World Series. So from an MLB perspective, I feel like a team's success definitely pays tribute to winning an MVP, but as I mentioned, the award itself definitely goes to an individual that has been playing great throughout an entire season.
Yeah, I agree with you, Logan, but my aspect on this whole thing is it's most valuable player. Yes, the team, it looks better if the team they are on is good. And like you said, out of the 2016 were on playoff teams, but there have been times like last year, Jose Ramirez came up runner-up to the MVP in the AL, and he had better stats. I just think that in all sports, NBA, NFL, MLB, your team shouldn't have to be good to earn you the MVP. Excuse me, because if you outperform every other player in the league, but you're on a bad team, you still are the most valuable player in the league.
I mean, I completely agree. Like Mike Trout, 2 years ago, I believe he won MVP. 4 or 5 years ago, he won the MVP again in the AL, and his team didn't make the playoffs. So to a certain extent, I agree. It's all about the player's success. It's all about their individual stats. But from just a perspective of the entire MLB and the history, I feel like a team going to the playoffs, making that push, a deep run to a World Series, has that factor weighing in on if the player wins the MVP or not.
Now, Logan, you mentioned statistical achievements for considering an MVP candidate. And our first one that we're going to talk about is Vladimir Guerrero from the Blue Jays. He has 15 first-place votes, and the team has an 85-66 record. And we're also going to look at Shohei Ohtani from the Angels. He actually has 56 first-place votes. That's by far the most votes so far. And he has a 72-78 record with the Angels. So a little bit of an interesting conversation. So what are your guys' take on these two candidates?
Without doubt, I'm going Shohei Ohtani. I mean, there's no debate about it. He leads the Angels in 3 different batting categories. He has the most home runs on the team with 44 home runs. He's second in the league with home runs behind Salvador Perez. He leads the team in RBIs with 94. I mean, the list goes on. His percentage is .357. I mean, he broke the record for most home runs by a Japanese-born player in July. It's September. That was almost 2 months ago. To me, there's no debate that it's going to be Ohtani, and the stats prove it.
100% agree. I mean, Guerrero, he's great. He's on that team that can potentially make the playoffs, maybe make a deep run into the playoffs. But Ohtani, what pitcher do you know is top 3 in home runs? When have we ever seen that? He's just such a dual threat player, pitching, batting, even running the bases. He is 9th in stolen bases among all players in the MLB. And while 9th may not seem like a crazy stat, remember, he's a pitcher/designated hitter, so he does not get up as often to bat as these other guys that are getting 4 or 5 at-bats a game. So Ohtani, I think it's unanimous that he should be the AL MVP.
Now, I completely understand your guys' points. I think Shohei Ohtani is a perfect candidate for MVP, but I will throw this discussion your guys this way. Vladimir Guerrero, he leads the MLB in home runs, hits, batting average, runs scored, and total bases, not to mention he's 22 years old. So, I mean, what do you think of those stats compared to Shohei Ohtani?
I think they just scream how great of an overall player that Guerrero really is. But I think MVP also comes into that aspect of how impactful the player's been in the MLB. Like Spencer said, first Japanese player to break the home run record since who knows how long. And I just think the impact he's made in the league this year, his diversity with pitching and hitting. I love Guerrero, and those stats scream MVP, but I just don't see a way Ohtani does not get the award this year.
Right, and again, the stats scream MVP, but I think also what Logan mentioned is Ohtani's a pitcher. So, like, this isn't your first baseman, this isn't your second baseman, this isn't some outfielder. This is your pitcher who has a 9-2 record when starting pitcher, and he's leading the team in home run. Like Logan said, we rarely see that, but when you talk about, who leads the MLB in home runs, the pitcher has, is the second most. Like, you never hear a pitcher hitting bombs almost every game. It's just unheard of.
Yeah, when you say he's a pitcher, that really boosts your run for the MVP race, certainly. And now let's go over to the National League side of things. We have Bryce Harper, who has the most 42 first-place votes, and then Fernando Tatis Jr. with the Padres, who has 27 first-place votes. But both of these guys are playing with teams that have almost 500 records. Bryce Harper with the Phillies, a 77-74 record, and Tatis with the Padres, 76-73 record. So what do you guys think of this MVP race?
I like Bryce Harper and all, but to be honest, I think he's a little overrated. I have Fernando Tatis Jr. winning the MVP. He's got 39 home runs, fifth most in the MLB right now, 92 RBIs, 2 less than Ohtani. The Padres didn't have a great season, like you mentioned, Caleb, but I don't think that the team itself comes together when it's just a player. It's the most valuable player. It's himself, and his stats show that. Now, there was an incident on Saturday night with him fighting with a teammate that doesn't come into play, but it's going to have a rocky image on him for the rest of the season.
And like you said, imagery. Everybody sees Bryce Harper as kind of like this cocky player that is kind of gotten a name for himself. Whether you hate him, you love him, there's no in-between. But Bryce Harper, I think, is easily the winner of the NL MVP. He's top 5 in almost every single batting category. First in slugging percentage, first in opposite plus, I just messed that up completely. First in on base and plus slugging. He's also great in fielding, top 10 in almost every fielding category. And as a fielder, an outfielder specifically, you don't see it too much that a guy puts up top 5 numbers in almost every batting and top 10 in all fielding categories.
So Harper and Tatis are the main guys for the going for the NL MVP. But just a quick question for you guys: do you think Juan Soto or even Max Scherzer can make a case for it?
I think Max Scherzer is more in that case for a Cy Young. I love Scherzer. He was a great pitcher for the Nationals. He's carried over with the Dodgers, but quite honestly, I don't see an MVP case for him. And Juan Soto, he's super underrated. He doesn't have that big name built for him like Bryce Harper and Tatis. So I like both guys to get in that mix of things, but I think, quite honestly, it's got to be between Tatis or Harper.
And like Logan said, I like Soto. He's a great player, but I think that his stats just aren't there yet compared to Harper's and Tatis. I mean, he had a great season. He's a young player. He'll have a great career, but in terms of stats, he's nowhere close to Bryce Harper or Fernando.
We're getting towards the end of the regular season for Major League Baseball, but the NFL is in the beginning of its regular season, so we're going to talk about the NFL when we come back right here on Plead Your Case. Welcome back to Plead Your Case on WCTV. Now it's time to talk about the National Football League. In the AFC, we surprisingly only have 2 unbeaten teams left, the Las Vegas Raiders and the Denver Broncos. And our gentlemen are going to give an analysis. Spencer, you go first.
Well, I love both teams. They had a great start to the season, but unfortunately I don't think the Denver Broncos have any shot of making the playoffs. They have a pretty hard schedule. Out of the 15 games left, they will win 4, and they're going to finish the season 6-11, which, to be honest, is not a great record, especially in the division they're in. They're with the Raiders and the Chiefs, to mention the 2 bigs. Going on with the Raiders, I do believe they're going to make the playoffs. I'm not a fan of the Raiders, but I do think they're going to make it. The Chiefs are obviously going to make it, but the Raiders will make the playoffs. I think, in fact, that the Raiders could win their next 6 games and start the season 8-0. I don't know if that's a hot take or not. You can decide that if you want, but they start out 2-0. They play the Dolphins on Sunday. That's an easy win for them, and their next 5 after that are, I think, winnable games. And once they get to the playoffs, though, they don't have the means to win a playoff game.
I'm wearing the black and silver for a reason today. Big Raiders fan, 2-0 start. I couldn't ask for anything more, quite honestly, but we have seen this before with the Raiders. The past 2 seasons started out really hot and just a smooth decline throughout the rest of the season. But this year is going to be different. Derek Carr is back to putting up his MVP caliber numbers, leading the league in passing yards. He's tied for 9th in passing touchdowns. And he's already led the Raiders to 2 wins over 2 playoff teams from last year. So the Raiders making the playoffs? Absolutely. Will they win a game? I think that honestly depends on who they are matched up with, because they beat the Baltimore Ravens, who everyone views as 2nd, maybe even 1st in the AFC North. So I think the Raiders, if they meet the Ravens again, obviously can pull off that win. As for the Denver Broncos, I'm 100% agreeing with Spencer here. No chance of playoffs. I see at best 7 to 8 wins. They had 2 matchups against probably 2 of the worst teams in the league with the Giants and Jaguars. So I just think the Broncos being 2-0 is a little bit overrated. I get it, 2-0, undefeated. Obviously, throw the confetti, but you play 2 of the worst teams in the league. And like Spencer said, their schedule is very tough. Outside the Jets, Lions, and Bengals, I don't see the Broncos winning very many games after those guys.
Lowen throwing out the word overrated, which we will have an overrated and underrated segment coming up here soon with college football. But to go on to your point about the Broncos, I mean, they beat the Giants and they beat the Jaguars. I see that as kind of like it's a good start, but they're kind of weaker teams that they beat. And the next, they host the Jets next Sunday. I mean, that's going to be an easier win, and then there's no real challenge until week 4 when they have to face the Baltimore Ravens. But the interesting thing that happened this past week in the NFL, lots and lots of injuries. Just to give you an example, Tua Tagovailoa, Andy Dalton, Carson Wentz, Jarvis Landry, and the majority of the Steelers' defense, Joe Hayden, Devin Bush, Tyson Alualu, Deontay Johnson, TJ Watt. I mean, Deontay Johnson is a receiver, but you get my point. The injury list goes on and on. I didn't even mention some of the other guys. So how much do you think that's going to play a factor in the upcoming weeks here in the NFL regular season?
Well, like you said, Caleb, a lot of injuries. The one I'm worried about most, and as a Browns fan, Jarvis Landry going down. He's their leading reception for yards and touchdowns. I hate to see it as a Browns fan, all these years of having terrible records, but I think that him being out and hopefully Odell coming back soon is going to give Baker the insight, hopefully, to throw to Odell, because when Odell was on there the first year or 2, he didn't throw to Odell, and I don't know why. Yeah, Odell's a little overrated. He had the one-handed catch that went viral, and everyone was saying Odell for a year. But I think with Jarvis Landry out, Odell should be a primary target, and then not to forget Chubb, who will run over any defense, I think, in the league.
When it comes to injuries, I think Pittsburgh easily has it hit the hardest so far this season. Like you mentioned, we're only 2 weeks in, but all those defensive starters that were out versus the Raiders definitely played a big contribution into helping the Raiders win that game. And that's coming from a Raiders fan. Legitimately, if the Steelers had all those players in, there's no way we're winning that football game. But Pittsburgh, as far as a complete team, I think they are a fringe playoff team. If they can keep all those guys healthy, the key players, they might be able to just barely squeeze their way into the playoffs. As for the Browns and all the other teams that suffered injuries, I hope you have a good backup plan, or else your season's just going to be a smooth crumble and not end very well.
I'm actually have to disagree. I don't think the Steelers. I think Ben's done. I'm tired of watching Big Ben. For the past 2 years, he's old. He's got to retire. I think it's over. It's over. The Big Ben era in Pittsburgh is over. You heard it here first. I think he's got it this year. After this year, he should retire. I think the Browns and the Ravens are going to make the playoffs. The Bengals or the Steelers aren't going to make the playoffs.
Now, Logan, what do you think about this Big Ben discussion?
I think Big Ben, like you mentioned, he's here for this one last push, try to make it into the playoffs. I agree completely that this should be his last season. I think he's on E. He does not have a lot left in the tank, but they went out, they got Najee Harris, but then they significantly saw a decrease in their offensive line. So Pittsburgh, as a complete team, you're not there. Defensively, you're pretty complete. The offense has just got a lot of holes still, so if you're going to go to the playoffs, your defense is going to need to carry you. And they used to say defense wins championships, but we're not seeing that too often anymore in this NFL.
That's a very interesting point. Definitely, indeed. So we talk about veteran quarterbacks a little bit. Now we're going to start with rookie and younger quarterbacks that have been kind of struggling, especially over week 2. It's the likes of Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, Joe Burrow. These guys kind of struggling in week 2, and let's see what's going to happen here in week 3. So what do you guys see from these young quarterbacks going in further into the regular season?
Every young quarterback's going to have their struggles. I mean, no quarterback's going to come into the league, start throwing for 400 yards their first games. It's just not heard of. I mean, maybe Tom Brady on his second year, who had a great second year, but that's Tom Brady, and he's arguably the greatest of all time. But I mean, in any sport, no rookie's going to come in dropping. There's a rare occasion where a star player comes in and drops those big numbers. But Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, they shouldn't. Zach Wilson had 2 interceptions in the first quarter on Sunday, but that should not bring down their momentum or their energy. They need to keep up. They need to keep their heads up. If they drop their heads now too early in the season, who knows where they'll end up.
I completely agree with the young quarterback struggles. They're just getting adjusted to the NFL. You can make that excuse for Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson, and I guess you could argue Justin Fields, who's actually going to be starting next week due to Andy Dalton's injury. But for Joe Burrow, I'm not sure what the struggle is. He looked absolutely awful versus Chicago last week. 3 interceptions on back-to-back plays. It just did not look good for him. Obviously coming off a very severe injury in 2020. Maybe he's still trying to get adjusted to standing in the pocket, getting used to taking hits again, but I think it's way too early to tell. Like you mentioned, Caleb, we're in week 2. We have 16 weeks of football still to go. No need to hit a panic button. These guys are going to be fine, and they are going to eventually adjust and become good NFL quarterbacks. They weren't picked number 1 and number 2 overall for no reason.
As a final question, out of the top 3 rookies, quarterbacks we discussed between Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and Justin Fields, who do you think is going to bloom the most in these next couple of weeks?
Without it, it's going to be Justin Fields without a doubt. And I am an Ohio State fan, but I just think, disregarding that he's getting to start next Sunday, he's going to be able to show his potential. I think he should have been starting the first 2 games, to be completely honest with you. I think Andy Dalton is a joke. But Justin Fields will come out on top of those 2, on Trevor Lawrence, He's got everything. He's got an arm. He's able to rush out of the pocket if needed. I just don't see anything stopping Justin Fields from potentially taking the Bears somewhere.
Justin Fields looked awful in the game time that he got last week against the Bengals, the Cincinnati Bengals, who have been a joke to the AFC North for years. Justin Fields talked in preseason. It's a lot slower than I anticipated. Well, you looked awful in your first performance in the regular season, and I don't know how that will continue. We'll have to see when he actually gets to play a full game and not get thrown in. But out of those 3 guys, I hate to sound like your average NFL fan, but Trevor Lawrence. He's number 1 pick for a reason. Urban Meyer, very questionable head coach hiring, I think. But overall, Trevor Lawrence, I think he has the most talent out of the 3. If the Jaguars can manage to build around him with years to come, not just this season, he's easily going to be the best quarterback from his class.
So we just wrapped up our discussion about NFL football. When we come back, we're going to talk about college football, so don't go anywhere.
Have you ever been to the Everly Library? If not, you should, because it's great. They have books of all different genres: history, biography, fiction. Try The Evolution of Life, Life of Pi, or Jurassic Park. So what if books aren't your thing? Try movies like Frozen, or TV shows like Lost. Books and DVDs aren't the only thing though. Take a trip to the second floor. Welcome to the Writing Center. These tutors will tell you everything you need to know about writing a paper, and they'll help revise your essays. Now let's head back down. Behold, the Knox Learning Center. Need to print something out 5 minutes before your next class because you procrastinated? No problem. You can also print off pictures of dogs. Because, well, you can. So grab your homework, laptop, and textbook, and study diligently. Bring your lunch too. Actually, you can't. That's illegal. Now you know the Everly Library. Stop by anytime. Seriously, it's open all week.
It's time for a little overrated or underrated when it comes to college football teams so far. Now we're going to start with the first team for college football. Number 3, the Oregon Ducks. 3-0 on the season. They have wins over number 22 Fresno State, number 10 Ohio State. Sorry, Spencer, I know that you are an Ohio State fan, and Stony Brook. So what's your analysis on the Oregon Ducks?
I think they are overrated. Yeah, they did beat Fresno State and Ohio State, but they only have one more game this season against a top-ranked opponent, and it's UCLA, who's a fringe top 25 team. The last time Oregon Ducks have even been in a real conversation for college football playoffs, I don't even know if they were in conversation with Justin Herbert. Maybe it was back in Marcus Mariota days that they were a legit playoff contending team, but I think Oregon's very overrated despite their 2 wins over ranked opponents.
I'm about to disagree. I think Oregon's very underrated, and as Caleb said, unfortunately, the news I received the day Ohio State lost to Oregon was painful, but they're number 3 in the rankings. I think they quietly moved in there. They beat Fresno, and then they beat OSU, and after that, like Logan said, they play UCLA, which they should easily beat, and then they have an easy schedule. I think if they keep winning, which they should go undefeated this year, they should, and they are scoring lots of loads and loads of points, then I think they'll easily be in the top 4, and Bama's good, but anything can happen, and Oregon might have a chance this year.
And you mentioned Bama. We are not going to talk about Bama because they're number 1. We just know that it's Alabama. So we're going to move on to our next candidate. Number 4 in the country, Oklahoma Sooners. 3-0 on the season as well. They've got wins over Tulane, WCU, and Nebraska. What is your take on the Sooners?
I'm going once again with the overrated. They faced no ranked opponents, like you mentioned, who they played. They played a bunch of teams that are bottom of the barrel year after year. Maybe they briefly get in a top 25, but I don't think Oklahoma deserves a number 4 spot, and I don't think they hang in there. They have only 2 ranked matchups, number 25 Kansas State and number 14 Iowa State. I don't think those 2 ranked teams, even if they beat them, will be enough to keep them in the top 4 seed. So I think Oklahoma, for where they're at right now, is definitely overrated.
Yeah, I'm going to completely agree with Logan. They're so overrated. I'm tired of hearing about how good Spencer Rattler is because I just don't see it. I don't know if he is hiding his skills, or I don't see it. I don't see his skills from other QBs like Bama's QB, Bryce Young, who's an excellent quarterback. I just don't see Rattler doing that, and there's all this Heisman talk that Rattler's going to win Heisman. I don't think that's even close. They barely beat Tulane 40-35 after they were up 17 at the half. I also agree with Logan. They don't deserve that number 4 spot. I think Cincinnati or Penn State should be in that 4 spot. They're just so overrated, and Spencer Rattler is just way too overhyped.
And the thing about Oklahoma, too, is when it comes to college football playoff time, they usually struggle to win games there. So we're going to move to number 6, Penn State. The Nittany Lions are 3-0 on the season, and they have wins over number 18, Wisconsin, on the road against Ball State, and number 23, Auburn. An interesting discussion for the Nittany Lions and James Franklin's team.
Well, we are perfectly rated right now at number 6. They have a ton of ranked matchups coming up. They have number 5 Iowa, number 10 Ohio State, 19 Michigan, 20 Michigan State. If Penn State wants to make their way into the college football playoffs, they have to capitalize on these ranked matchups, especially number 5 Iowa and number 10 Ohio State. Penn State at number 6, they're sitting pretty, they're looking good. like I said, capitalize on those ranked games, and you're in the college football playoffs.
I think they're very underrated. I think this is the lowest they've been in a long time, the number 6 spot. I am a little worried about when they play these higher-ranked teams like Ohio State. They have a history of losing to OSU, and I see that continuing this year. Although they do have one of the best receiving corps in college football, and as Logan mentioned, they have one of the hardest, without doubt, schedules in college football, facing all these ranked teams. But they quietly just kind of put themselves in the 6th spot after the first 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, excuse me. And I just think that they have a solid shot at going up maybe a spot or 2 more, but I don't see them. They have no competition, and there's no way they compete with Bama or Georgia, I think.
Now we're going to go over to Penn State's Big Ten rival, the number 10 Ohio State Buckeyes. They're 2-1 on the season. They've got wins over Minnesota, Tulsa, and as we mentioned, the loss to number 3 Oregon at home. So what do you think of these Ohio State Buckeyes?
Now, I know a lot of people may not agree with what I'm about to say here, but I think Ohio State at number 10 is actually kind of underrated. When you look at it, yeah, their 2 wins are against teams that are kind of bottom feeders, but you lost to number 3 Oregon by 7. Top 3 team, you're losing to them by 7. Like I mentioned, they have Penn State left, and they share similar opponents to the Big Ten with Penn State, Michigan State, and Michigan. Ohio State can work their way up in the seedings. I don't see any way they make it into the college football playoffs, but I think Ohio State at number 10 is a little bit of an understatement to what the team can truly do.
And I agree with that, but at the same time, the team can do a lot, and I believe they should have beat Oregon, and I just believe they're overrated this year. There's so many problems. There's coaching staff issues with different coaches saying that they're calling the plays, that they're the ones running the plays, and other coaches are saying this, and there's a lot of confusion in the coaching staff. The quarterback situation is just rough. Overall, I mean, they're in the number 10. They're top 10, but I just, with the teams that they play left, I don't see them staying there. I mean maybe 6 or 7 at the highest, but other than that, I don't see them moving up any higher.
Number 10 spot, Ohio State Buckeyes. We're going to move up 1 spot to the number 9 Clemson Tigers at 2-1 in the season as well. They lost to number 2 Georgia, also a very competitive team, and they have wins over SC State and Georgia Tech. What do you think about the team that has lost their Lord and Savior Trevor Lawrence?
Simple, easy answer. They're overrated. Their new quarterback, and I apologize in advance for butchering his last name, DJ Uiagalelei. I don't think he's that great. I think he was overhyped coming in for Trevor Lawrence's backup, and they barely beat a Georgia Tech team. They beat them 14-8. Georgia Tech's never been a football school really, so Clemson, number 9, definitely overrated.
And yeah, same thing as Logan. They're very overrated. DJ, he's only a sophomore, and again, it's going to be hard to follow in the steps of the Lord and Savior, as Caleb mentioned, Trevor Lawrence, but Clemson, Bama, Ohio State, they're known for having the top QBs in the country. I expected more from him. I mean, they're ranked 9 after a loss to Georgia, in which Georgia played outstanding defense in that game, but I just don't. They're going to be right with Ohio State, and they're going to be right next to each other almost all season, I believe.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for tuning in to Plead Your Case, and to our top-notch crew behind the scenes, our producers, Jeremiah Miller and Brock Owens. We say a big thank you to them as well, and be sure to check us out on the Waynesburg University Digital Productions page on YouTube. That's WUDP. And until next time, I'm Caleb Yauger, and we'll see you on the next episode of Plead Your Case right here on WCTV.
This has been a production of Waynesburg Community Television.